Karen flew out of the water like a dolphin on fire, screaming it burns, while flailing her arms and scrambling across the lawn like a wet cat at a dog show. She had launched herself headfirst into what she thought was a luxury pool meant for lounging and HOA cocktail hours, but instead landed straight into an Arctic cow bath filled with 600 pounds of ice and 2 confused Highland cattle licking salt blocks nearby. I stood there on the porch sipping iced tea, trying not to choke from laughing as she slipped on a patch of mud and yelled at me that this was attempted murder by refrigeration. The 911 call she made right after went something like this: "Yes, hi, I think my internal organs are frozen and I want to press charges for negligent swimming pool conditions." She didn't even live on my property. Heck, she wasn't even invited. That was the day I learned HOA Karen didn't just cross the line, she did a cannonball over it. It all started that scorching Saturday in July when the heat wave turned everything outside into a giant microwave. I had just finished rigging up the cow cooling pool like I did every summer. It wasn't fancy, just a large steel livestock tank I'd converted into a sunken cold bath with bags of crushed ice dumped in every morning. My Highland cattle were especially sensitive to heat, and I'd be damned if they were going to suffer through triple-digit temperatures while I had the means to help them cool down. I had built that setup with my own 2 hands years ago when Grandpa left me the ranch, and even added a small shade awning and fence around it to keep nosy neighbors from interfering. Turns out fences didn't stop certain types of neighbors, especially ones who thought they owned everything they could see. Karen was the president of the HOA that bordered my land. She lived 3 houses down from the edge of my pasture in a stucco monstrosity with fake columns and those tiny yard flamingos that always seemed to glare at you. She was known for sending out violation notices for things like mailbox height and unpatriotic porch paint. The kind of woman who wore aviator glasses inside and thought every barking dog was a direct attack on her lifestyle. But nothing she ever did prepared me for the moment she decided my cow pool was actually hers. That morning I was minding my own business, tossing another load of ice into the tub, while Daisy and Mabel the cows gave me approving grunts. I was wearing cargo shorts and an old t-shirt and had just settled down with a cold drink when I heard the sound of someone climbing the back fence. I figured it was a raccoon or maybe one of the neighborhood kids trying to take a shortcut, but then I saw the top of a wide-brimmed sun hat bobbing over the wood slats. A second later Karen flopped over the edge and landed on her feet like she was sneaking into a country club. She didn't even look around. Just strutted right past the cows who eyed her like she was an alien and stood at the edge of the ice pool with a satisfied smirk. I started walking toward her, but before I could say anything she shouted, "Oh my God, finally a civilized feature in this dump," and launched herself into the tub like she was auditioning for the Olympic dive team. What followed was a sound I can only describe as a combination of dolphin screech and blender malfunction as she hit the ice water and came flying back up in less than 3 seconds. Her face turned pink, then purple, then a strange shade of regret. She shouted at me accusingly, "What kind of psychopath fills a pool with ice who does that to their neighbors?" I pointed at the cows who had backed up slightly, now staring at her with what I swear was cow confusion, and said, "It's not for neighbors, it's for them." That's when she really lost it. She started shivering so hard she knocked over a salt block, then slipped trying to climb out and landed flat on the grass. I tried to help her up, but she swatted my hand away and screamed, "Don't touch me, I know my rights, I'm calling the authorities." 5 minutes later she was on her phone pacing in soaking clothes, while still shivering, yelling into the receiver about pool sabotage and cow accessories being a legal health hazard. I stood there, arms crossed, watching her like a live sitcom as the dispatcher apparently tried to understand what exactly the emergency was. Karen kept yelling phrases like unregulated refrigeration and toxic cow presence. Eventually she stormed off, muttering about lawsuits and animal control and how I'd regret humiliating her in front of God and the HOA. Later that day a deputy actually showed up. Young guy with mirrored shades and a confused expression already on his face. He looked at the ice bath, the cows, the fence, and then at me. I gave him the rundown and even showed him the feed tags and livestock wellness certificate I kept taped inside the barn. He side-chuckled and said this is the weirdest call I've gotten all month and told me no crime had been committed. When I asked him if Karen could file anything, he shook his head and said not unless you dumped her yourself, which I assume you didn't. I told him she dove in like a penguin with a grudge, and he laughed again before driving off. But the real fun started that evening. Karen returned with an entire printed binder of what she called community guidelines. She demanded I drain the pool immediately, saying it was a public safety concern, and cited some obscure HOA bylaw about recreational water features requiring prior approval. I reminded her that my land wasn't even in the HOA jurisdiction, and that the pool wasn't recreational, it was veterinary. She accused me of fabricating cow spa therapy to get around the rules, and warned me that the board would take legal action. That was when I decided I wasn't going to take this lightly. You see, this wasn't just about Karen being an entitled pain in the neck. It was about control. She thought she could push her way around because she wore a name tag at community meetings and printed memos in colored folders. But this was my land, my animals, and my right to keep a couple cows cool on a hot day without needing HOA permission. What Karen didn't realize was that I wasn't just some guy with a barn and a funny accent. I had resources, I had history, and I had a plan forming. By nightfall she had filed some kind of complaint with her board and posted a passive-aggressive message on the neighborhood forum warning about trespass hazards and unidentified bodies of water on adjacent properties. But while she was typing away in her scented candlelit office, I was setting up a brand new motion-activated camera on the fence, just in case she decided to come back for round 2. What she didn't know was that this whole ordeal had gone viral thanks to my cousin streaming part of it on his phone. The video was already getting shared under the title Cow Spa Karen Attacks Ice and Loses. That was day 1. A pool full of ice. A cow-friendly idea. And one HOA president who'd learn that just because you shout doesn't mean you win. Especially when the cows are on my side. The sun was already baking the gravel driveway by the time I heard the hollow thud of someone slapping a rolled-up notice against my gate. I didn't have to see her face to know who it was. That signature stomp in wedge sandals, the scent of artificially floral perfume lingering in the air like a hostile warning, and the distinct sound of someone muttering about bylaws under her breath. It was Karen. I peeked through the slats in the fence and saw her sticking a laminated citation to one of my fence posts with pink duct tape, standing back like she'd just tagged a wild animal in its habitat. I didn't even have to read it to know it was nonsense, but curiosity got the better of me. I walked out with my coffee, still in my boots and flannel shirt, and read the freshly printed atrocity. It was a formal HOA violation addressed to resident of adjacent property, demanding the immediate removal of unregulated aquatic installation, and citing a completely fictional clause about visual pollution and unauthorized thermal experiments. She had even stamped it with an imitation gold seal. I almost laughed, but she was already talking. She crossed her arms and stared at me with a squint that said she was expecting resistance. I gave her none. I just let the silence hang long enough to make her uncomfortable. Finally I asked her if she seriously believed the HOA had jurisdiction over my cattle bath. She nodded with the kind of smug confidence usually reserved for cartoon villains and informed me that my fence technically touched the shared community boundary and that meant certain responsibilities extended into my zone. She even pulled out a folded map with highlights and arrows she'd drawn herself in what looked like glitter gel pen. According to her logic, because my land was within visual range of the main HOA walking trail, it was legally subject to aesthetic standards and safety audit. I asked her if cows counted as visual pollution too. She didn't blink. She said they were technically a biohazard when combined with unfiltered water sources. I reminded her, again, that this wasn't a community swimming pool and there was no unfiltered anything about it. It was a stock tank filled with clean water and ice, specifically for my livestock. And if she had an issue with that, she could take it up with the Agricultural Extension Office. She smirked and said she already had. My stomach tightened slightly. That meant she was trying to go bigger. This wasn't just about trespassing or embarrassment anymore. This was about control. She wanted to make my pool a symbol of rebellion against her little empire of rules and regulations, and she wasn't about to lose. The next day, a man in khakis and a tucked-in county badge shirt showed up. He introduced himself as Ron from Zoning Compliance and held a clipboard like it was an ancient scroll. I offered him coffee and he politely declined. He explained that someone had filed a complaint about an unpermitted water structure potentially affecting runoff and community aesthetic. I walked him out back and showed him the entire setup, explaining the tank's purpose, its safety measures, how it wasn't plumbed into any public line, and that it had been operating without issue for 3 years. The cows were lounging peacefully, half submerged in the cold water with fans set up nearby, living their best lives. Ron chuckled, wrote a few notes, and said it looked like the animals were better off than most humans during this heat wave. He said he'd file it as non-violation unless something changed. I thanked him, and as he turned to leave, I saw Karen peeking from behind her hedges with binoculars. That evening I checked the local HOA forum. Karen had already posted a message titled, "Dangerous Developments on Perimeter Property." In it, she warned about hazardous conditions affecting the integrity of our community image, and made veiled threats about unregulated water systems contributing to mold, rats, and mental distress. I almost choked on my iced tea when I read the part that claimed the presence of cows near suburban fences was a psychological trigger for some resident. Below it, neighbors were actually replying, but not how she wanted. One guy posted a photo of the cows with sunglasses and called it the best thing he'd seen all week. Another neighbor named Kathy wrote that her toddler loved seeing the cows and asked if I ever hosted animal visit. A handful of residents even offered to help maintain the cow bath. Karen's thread was getting ratioed hard. The public was siding with the cows. But Karen wasn't done. The next day, she upped her game. I found a sign staked just outside the fence, right at the edge of where HOA property began. It read Future HOA Public Recreation Space, Coming Soon, in printed block letters with Karen's name underneath in tiny font. She had taped a mock survey over it with several lines titled, Pool Access Suggestions, and Hours for Community Use. It was a piece of paper stapled to a stick, but she was already acting like she was opening a hotel. I calmly removed the sign, walked it back to her porch, and left it neatly rolled with a bough made of baling twine and a note that said, Respect fences and livestock. Moo means no. Karen showed up at my doorstep 5 minutes later fuming. She demanded to know how I could be so selfish with a community resource. I told her again, calmly, that the ice bath was for livestock. Not humans. Not parties. Not some weird HOA spa club. Livestock. She accused me of lying. She said I was hiding behind fake rules and exploiting loopholes in land usage policy. When I asked her if she'd like to talk to my cousin, who worked at the county assessor's office, she paled just a little and stormed off. 2 mornings later, it escalated again. I woke up to find that someone had tried to hang a string of tiki lights along the outer fence and left behind a plastic lawn flamingo wearing a tiny inner tube. I had a feeling who did it but waited for confirmation. That afternoon, I checked the camera footage. Sure enough, Karen and another woman from the board had come by late the previous night, trying to stage the area to make it look more recreational. The cows, bless them, stared the entire time. Mabel even followed them from the other side of the fence like a suspicious lifeguard. I posted the footage online with the caption, Nighttime Trespassers Attempt to Turn Cow Tub into Community Pool. The comments were gold. And then came the cherry on top. Karen filed an emergency HOA meeting, demanding that members vote to designate the area adjacent to my property as an HOA-sponsored community relaxation zone. She made a dramatic speech about unity and hydration, and even quoted a made-up statistic about heat stroke rates among suburban adults. But right before the vote, someone asked if the land in question was actually within HOA control. When she said, "Technically not yet," the room erupted. One old man stood up and declared, "Karen, we're not annexing farmland for a kiddie pool, we just want you to stop harassing the cows." She tried to save face by saying it was about beautification and property values, but the damage was done. That night I threw together a small cookout. Nothing fancy, just ribs, sweet tea, and a few neighbors who'd backed me up. As the sun set, we sat near the cattle, who were once again enjoying the ice bath in peace. One guy brought a Bluetooth speaker, and someone played a slow country tune. We raised a toast to the cows, to fences, and to knowing when to mind your own business. But I knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat. She was the kind who'd double down and find new ways to cause problems. I'd won this round, but the next was coming. And I was ready for it. It was 2 days after the cookout when I noticed the blinking red light perched at the top corner of Karen's roof, angled perfectly toward my pasture. At first I thought maybe it was some new weather gadget or a motion detector for her prized rose bushes, but then I saw the lens glinting in the morning sun. It wasn't just any lens. It was a surveillance camera, pointed directly at my ice pool and the area around it. I stared at it for a while, sipping my coffee, the cows munching hay behind me without a care in the world, and I knew then that Karen had graduated from annoying to obsessed. That blinking light was her new power move. But she'd forgotten one thing. I had a little tech knowledge of my own and a cousin who worked in security installations for the county courthouse. Later that afternoon, after confirming that Karen had indeed installed 2 wireless cameras angled across the property line, I decided to flip the script. With the help of my cousin Caleb, we patched into the feed she was transmitting. No firewall, no encryption, just pure HOA-grade paranoia. Within an hour we had rerouted her footage into a private folder and layered it with a bit of farm humor. Every time her camera captured movement near the pool, it would trigger a cow-themed music overlay and captions like "Welcome to MooTube Live" and Karen's unauthorized nature documentary. Of course, none of it went public yet, we weren't interested in lawsuits, but the moment she came at me again, I was ready to hit upload. By sundown, I caught her standing behind her curtain, peeking through binoculars like a budget spy. She had no idea we were already seeing everything her cameras did. Mabel the cow even gave a big snort and stared straight into the lens at one point as if to say, "We see you too." The next morning, I found another printed notice on my gate, this one thicker, stapled, and wrapped in plastic in case of dew. It was an HOA-backed petition titled Community Pool Conversion Proposal. In it, Karen was rallying members to vote for transforming my cow cooling tank into an official neighborhood recreational zone for summer use. She'd somehow spun a narrative that I had once allowed unauthorized guests to swim in it, conveniently ignoring the fact that she had jumped in uninvited, and was now acting like she had to take over the space to prevent future liability. There were signatories too. About 8 names from people I'd never even seen near my fence. Curious, I went knocking on a couple doors that afternoon just to confirm. 3 of the signatures were fake. One belonged to a woman who'd moved out last year. Another was an elderly neighbor who told me point-blank that Karen said it was just a routine community survey and tricked him into signing. The third was a kid, literally a 12-year-old boy who thought he was signing up for a summer water balloon fight. I took photos of each of them holding signs that said, "I did not agree to this HOA nonsense," and kept them stored, just in case things got legal. The worst part came that evening. Karen showed up again, this time with a man in a blazer and clipboard who she introduced as a recreational property consultant. She claimed he was there to assess the pool's viability for public transformation. The man took one look at the ice, the cows, the salt blocks, and the thermometers nailed to the barn post and gave her the flattest expression I've ever seen. He whispered something to her and walked off, shaking his head. Karen stayed behind, insisting that I should voluntarily remove the tub and replace it with a community kiddie pool with filtered jets and inflatable furniture. When I reminded her again that she was trespassing and delusional, she got loud. Real loud. She started shouting about how she had worked hard to keep this neighborhood beautiful, and that I was ruining community morale with livestock. I stood still, arms crossed, while the cows wandered up behind me like furry backup dancers. Then, as if fate timed it for maximum comedic effect, Mabel let out the longest, loudest moo I've ever heard, right in the middle of Karen's rant. The timing was so perfect I nearly lost it. Karen stopped mid-sentence, turned to look at the cow, and muttered something about ungodly farm beasts before storming off. The next morning, everything turned digital. Karen launched an online campaign in the HOA's private app titled Rescue the Pool. She uploaded pictures of my cow tub, cropped carefully to avoid the livestock in most of them, and claimed it was a neglected community feature being monopolized by one resident. She even posted an edited video clip of her slipping into the ice bath and cut out the parts showing she trespassed. She added captions like, "This could be your summer too," and "Don't let one man freeze out the entire neighborhood." Within hours, the post was flagged by several neighbors who had been at the cookout and knew the real story. Still, a few curious folks messaged me asking what exactly was going on. One even asked if I was hosting cow yoga next Saturday. That's when I realized Karen wasn't just coming for the pool. She was coming for attention. She didn't care about the cows or the water or even the property line. She cared about the spotlight, and when she couldn't control something, she tried to spin it into something she could. So I decided to hit back, not with rage or threats, but with something far more powerful: mockery. Caleb and I spent that evening editing the MooTube footage into a hilarious parody episode. We added dramatic music every time Karen stepped into frame, sound effects whenever a cow blinked at the camera, and a narrator voice that sounded suspiciously like a nature documentary. It started with "Welcome to the majestic pasture, where Highland cows relax in carefully cooled waters, unaware that a territorial suburban predator lurks nearby." We didn't upload it publicly, not yet, but we played it during poker night with a few local friends, and one guy laughed so hard he spit beer out his nose. Word started spreading. People asked me to release it online. I held off, not because I was worried about the backlash. By now, most of the neighborhood was on my side, but because I knew Karen would do something even dumber if I gave her just enough rope. And sure enough, she did. 3 days later, one of the motion cameras caught her sneaking around the side of my barn in the middle of the night. Wearing all black, with a flashlight, she was tiptoeing around like a cartoon burglar, carrying what looked like a container. When she reached the edge of the cow tub, she poured something into the water. She had no idea there was another camera above the barn angled straight at her. The next morning, I found the cows agitated and the water foamy with bubbles. It wasn't harmful, thank God, but it smelled like lavender detergent and bath beads. Karen had literally tried to sabotage the cow bath with bubble bath. That was it. I called the sheriff, gave them the footage, and pressed charges for trespassing and tampering with livestock property. The deputy who came out was the same one from before, and when he saw the footage, he burst out laughing before collecting the evidence. He said, and I quote, "Man, this woman's gonna end up in a Netflix documentary if she keeps this up." As Karen was being questioned, she doubled down again, yelling that I was poisoning the community and that her spa initiative was sabotaged. She actually said those words, spa initiative. Meanwhile, the cows stared blankly at the commotion like wise old judges who had seen enough. The fallout was beautiful. The HOA board held an emergency session where several members voted to suspend Karen's privileges pending investigation. Her online posts were locked. Her surveillance cameras were taken down by order of the HOA itself. And yet, she still wasn't done. Because she had one more card to play. One that involved a secret plan, a bulldozer, and a document she believed would change everything. And that's when I knew the real war had just begun. 3 days after the bubble bath sabotage, things went oddly quiet. Too quiet. Karen's usual antics, shouting from across the fence, leaving laminated threats on my mailbox, and sending HOA-wide emails filled with melodrama, stopped entirely. For someone as obnoxiously persistent as her, the silence was suspicious, like the calm before a stampede. The cows sensed it too. They'd gotten used to her racket, and now even Daisy looked up more often from her hay pile, ears twitching toward the suburban houses like she knew the enemy was regrouping. That's when I saw the flags. Orange survey flags, poked into the ground like neon weeds, lined up along the edge of my pasture. They hadn't been there the day before. I followed the little trail of flags around the fence, and found a new sign staked just off the HOA walking path. It was glossier than the last one and twice as ridiculous. It read, "Future site of HOA Wellness Spa and Reflective Garden under board review, your dues at work." Below it in smaller print was Karen's signature. She wasn't just trying to take the cow pool anymore. She was trying to annex part of my land into the HOA to turn it into some twisted idea of a community spa. But the most alarming part wasn't the sign. It was the unmistakable tracks in the gravel beside it. Bulldozer tracks. Real ones. At first, I thought maybe it was a prank. Or maybe she was bluffing. But when I called Caleb and had him cross-check recent permit filings, we found it. She had submitted a proposal for land reclassification with a supporting petition, one that, again, included forged signatures, some of which belonged to HOA board members who had already stepped down. But the kicker was that she had somehow convinced a landscaping company to schedule a pre-clearing consultation for the following morning. That meant a crew was coming, with equipment, onto my property, and they didn't even know it wasn't hers. The moment I hung up the phone, I started preparing. I printed out the official land deed with boundary coordinates, laminated it, and stuck it to every fence post on the side facing her property. Then I contacted Sheriff Wyatt, who was already all too familiar with Karen's antics. He agreed to send someone out that morning just in case things went sideways. And then, just to top it all off, I made invitations. I called it the Great Cow Pool Party, and printed out about 30 invitations for neighbors and locals who had supported me through Karen's campaign of chaos. I promised cold drinks, barbecue, live music, and therapeutic bovine presents. I even booked a local guitarist and got a bakery to donate cupcakes with tiny cow faces on top. If Karen wanted a spectacle, I was going to give her one, only it would be full of laughter, not laminated tyranny. The next morning arrived with a low rumble in the distance. At exactly 9:12 a.m., a flatbed truck rolled in towing a medium-sized bulldozer, followed by a landscaping crew in neon vests looking very confused. I met them at the gate with a copy of the land deed and a steaming cup of coffee. When I asked them who hired them, they sheepishly showed me a printed work order signed by none other than Karen Wilcox. It listed my address and described the job as clearing out an unkempt recreational area for HOA development. I showed them the deed. I showed them the fence. I even offered them some ribs. They took one look at the sheriff's car parked just beyond the pasture and backed out faster than a cat in a bathtub. Karen, however, had already arrived in full regalia. She wore a floppy sun hat, oversized sunglasses, and a scarf that looked like it came from a soap opera villain's wardrobe. When she saw the party starting, the barbecue smoking, and a dozen people already setting up chairs near the cow tub, she lost it. She marched toward the fence like a one-woman parade, carrying a clipboard and what appeared to be a megaphone. Her voice came out shrill and theatrical, demanding that the equipment be moved in, that the cows be relocated, and that I be detained for obstruction. The sheriff walked up to her calmly, asked to see her paperwork, and took it from her hand before she could argue. As he read it, she started ranting about community revitalization and public mental health. She even gestured toward the cow bath and accused me of maintaining a psychological trigger zone. When she realized no one was taking her seriously, she doubled down. She pushed past the fence, walked directly toward the cow tub, and attempted to plant a decorative shrub in the grass, yelling that she was symbolically claiming the area for HOA purposes. Unfortunately for her, she did this right as Mabel was walking out of the bath. The cow, cold, wet, and unimpressed, shook like a dog and sprayed Karen with a full-body splash. The moment froze in time. Her hat flew off. Her scarf slapped across her own face. Her clipboard landed in the mud. She screamed, stumbled backward into the shrub she just planted, and sat down with a wet thud, completely soaked. The party, which had paused at the commotion, erupted in laughter. Even the sheriff had to turn away to hide his smirk. Karen stood up, her entire outfit clinging to her like seaweed, and pointed at me with the fury of a drenched banshee. "This is war," she growled. "You will regret this humiliation." I looked around at my guests, at the cows, at the cupcake table with little signs that said, "Moo, you glad you came?" and smiled. "Lady," I said, "you've already lost." She stormed off toward her house, barefoot and dripping, swearing that lawyers would be involved and that I'd be seeing her in court. After she left, the party resumed like nothing had happened. People danced, the cows mooed in approval, and the guitarist played a twangy version of Ring of Fire that had even Sheriff Wyatt tapping his boot. Kids took turns tossing water balloons near the cow tub, and at one point, someone attached a floatie shaped like a pig to Daisy's back, which she tolerated with surprising grace. Everyone was happy. Everyone, that is, except Karen. But she wasn't done. Her ego wouldn't allow defeat to settle so easily. That night, I received an envelope slipped under my barn door. No stamp. No address. Just 3 words written in aggressive cursive. Formal notice served. Inside was a hand-typed document stating her intention to sue me for emotional distress, public defamation, land misappropriation, and unauthorized use of water-based facilities in a manner inconsistent with HOA standards. The claim was absurd. My attorney laughed when I showed him, saying the judge would toss it before Karen finished saying the word, misappropriation. But the letter revealed something else. A desperation, a final push from someone who couldn't let go of the fact that a simple cow tub had become the neighborhood's favorite landmark. The next day, I learned she'd filed the lawsuit for real. I wasn't worried. I had video footage, official documents, witness statements, even aerial drone images showing the true property line. But it wasn't the legal angle that got me excited. It was what we discovered when we dug into the paperwork she submitted with her filing. In her exhibits, she had accidentally attached a zoning map showing her own house's location. And on that map, clear as daylight, was a boundary line that no one had noticed before. A line that sliced right through her back patio. A line that, if accurate, meant part of her property was actually sitting on my land. That was the moment everything shifted. All her power, all her posturing, all her crusades against my cows, they had just been flipped. Because now I had something she couldn't spin, couldn't yell over, and couldn't bubble bath her way out of. It wasn't just about cows anymore. It was about land. About ownership. And the map in my hand meant that Karen had been trespassing every time she watered her lawn. She had no idea what she'd just unleashed. And I had no intention of letting it slide. I sat at the kitchen table with the zoning map spread out in front of me, tracing the thick black boundary lines with my finger over and over again just to be sure. It wasn't a prank, wasn't a misprint, and sure as day wasn't some technicality Karen could talk her way out of. According to county records, the entire back 10 feet of her property, including the fancy patio furniture she always bragged about and the spot where she staged her HOA spa photo shoot, was on my land. Not adjacent. Not disputed. Fully and legally mine. That meant every potted plant, every tiki torch, and even the extension cord she used for her bug zapper was sitting on ground she didn't own. All this time she'd been marching over here with her clipboards and complaints while throwing summer parties on a patch of my dirt. The absurdity of it made me laugh until I wheezed, but beneath the laughter was something colder and sharper. A decision forming. I'd let a lot slide since Karen first belly-flopped into my cow tub, thinking maybe she'd get bored or embarrassed and eventually move on. But now she was suing me, fabricating documents, and using HOA funds to fuel some personal war. She wanted to play with fire, but forgot who built the fence and who owned the matches. I didn't tell her right away. That would have been too easy. Instead, I quietly made an appointment at the county recorder's office, filed the necessary paperwork to formally assert my rights over the portion of land in question, and then contacted my lawyer to draft a notice of encroachment. It was all official, airtight, and legally sound. I made sure of it. While that was being processed, I had Caleb fly his drone over her backyard and take fresh high-resolution images, just in case we needed evidence showing structures on my property. Meanwhile, I began drafting a polite but firm letter to deliver once the papers were signed and sealed. But Karen, of course, didn't wait. 3 days before the court date for her nonsense lawsuit against me, she showed up with another ridiculous plan. This time she came wearing a blazer and a headset, trailed by a man carrying a folding table and a stack of what looked like HOA promotional flyers. She set up the table on the sidewalk just outside my fence and started handing out pamphlets that read, "Community Action Against Unlawful Land Use." She was trying to recruit neighbors into forming a subcommittee focused on reclamation and beautification of neglected adjacent property. Most people took the flyer, nodded awkwardly, then walked away. A few openly asked if this was about the cows again. One man glanced at the bold title, handed it back, and said he'd rather donate to a goat sanctuary than deal with her another minute. But Karen, undeterred, kept pitching her twisted version of events like a bad timeshare presentation. I waited until her little setup was in full swing before stepping outside. I didn't say a word, just stood there at the gate holding a large manila envelope and watched her try to pretend she hadn't seen me. When she finally looked up, I smiled and walked over calmly. Without a word, I laid the envelope on the folding table, opened it, and revealed the official stamped documents proving that a significant portion of her backyard, her patio, and even her prized rose trellis sat squarely on my property. Her face went pale. Not red, not flushed, but ghost white. She picked up the map and squinted at it like she could somehow will the lines to move. Then she looked at me and whispered, "No, that's not possible." I told her it was not only possible, it was already in the county record book. I added that my legal team would be filing a formal notice demanding the removal of all personal property from my land within 14 days. And if she failed to comply, we would seek legal remedies which, depending on the judge, could include monetary damages or even forced removal at her expense. I said it all with a straight face, not a hint of rage, just cold precision. Karen blinked several times like she was buffering, then tried to launch into some impromptu speech about historical neighborhood boundaries. I cut her off and said the land was mine, the cows were staying, and her tiki torches had 30 days to find a new home. The next morning, she took down the patio lights. Quietly. No audience. No HOA emails. Just her and a small ladder, working in silence like someone slowly packing up a dream that turned out to be a delusion. It was surreal watching her try to undo her own fantasy in slow motion. But what came next was the twist I didn't expect. Instead of withdrawing her lawsuit like any reasonable person would after discovering she was in the wrong, Karen doubled down one final time. On the day of the court hearing, she walked into the small claims courtroom in full business attire, dragging a rolling briefcase and acting like she was delivering the opening arguments at the Supreme Court. She presented a slideshow of blurry photos, printed graphs, and even brought in a stack of emails from HOA members complaining about unrelated things like traffic noise and garbage can lid. None of it had anything to do with me. She was throwing sand in the wind hoping some would land in the judge's eyes. But then came my turn. My attorney calmly presented the cow tub's purpose, the agricultural certification, the video of Karen's trespassing, the bubble bath incident, and finally the boundary map showing her encroachment. The judge didn't say a word for nearly a minute after the presentation. He just stared at the documents, then looked at Karen and asked, "You filed this lawsuit?" She nodded proudly. He rubbed his temples, exhaled deeply, and dismissed the case with prejudice. That meant she couldn't file again. But he didn't stop there. He reprimanded her in front of everyone for wasting the court's time and warned her that any further harassment of adjacent landowners would be treated as a legal offense. Karen sat frozen, jaw slightly open, still clutching her binder like it could shield her from reality. That night, I hosted the biggest barbecue the ranch had ever seen. More than 60 people came. We had live music, fireworks, and even a dunk tank filled with ice water, just for old times' sake. The cows got their own corralled area with shade tents and feed buckets decorated like party bowls. Caleb played the MooTube video we'd been saving on a projector screen for everyone to see. The crowd roared with laughter at every slow-motion clip of Karen falling into the cow tub, getting sprayed, or trying to command her way out of embarrassment. The final frame showed Mabel the cow chewing her cud next to a sign that read "Moo means no." The applause lasted nearly a full minute. Karen never showed her face that night. In fact, the next morning, a moving truck arrived at her house. She wasn't there to supervise. Someone else handled the packing. Neighbors whispered that she had gone to stay with her sister in another county. Others said the HOA had quietly asked her to resign after the court hearing made her a punchline. Whatever the truth was, by the end of the week, the house had a for sale sign in front of it. And just like that, she was gone. The pasture was quiet again. The fence was intact. The cows were content, their ice bath refilled, their water buckets full. Life returned to the simple rhythm it had always followed out here: sunrise, hay, a breeze cutting through the grass. But now there was a little more laughter in the air. A few more neighbors stopping by to say hello. A greater appreciation for just how ridiculous things could get when someone forgets where their land ends and their entitlement begins. I leaned on the fence post, watched Mabel step into the chilled water with a sigh of pleasure, and smiled. No more trespassers. No more megaphones. Just peace, pasture, and one very well-earned victory.